Chapter 27. The first clash of the two armies was inconclusive. The king's skirmish line, consisting of light infantry accompanied by archers, advanced on Morgorath's left flank in a probing movement, retreating hastily when a battalion of heavy infantry formed up and moved forward to meet them. The lightly armed skirmishers scampered back to the safety of their own lines, ahead of the slow-treading Wargals. Then, as a company of heavy cavalry trotted forward toward the Wargal battalion's left flank, the Wargals reformed from their column of fours marching order into a slow-moving, defensive square and withdrew to their own lines. For the next few hours, that remained the pattern of the battle. Small forces would probe the other side's defences, larger forces would offer to counter, and the first attack would melt away. Arald, Fergus, and Tyler sat their horses beside the king, on a small knoll in the centre of the royal army. Battlemaster David was with a small group of knights making one of the many forays towards the Wargal army. "All this toing and froing is getting me down," Arald said sourly. The king smiled at him. He had one of the most important attributes of a good commander, almost unlimited patience. "Morgorath is waiting," he said simply, "waiting for Halt's army to show itself in our rear. Then he'll attack, have no doubt." "Let's just get on with it ourselves," growled Fergus, but Duncan shook his head, pointing to the ground immediately to the front of Morgorath's position. "The land there is soft and boggy," he said. "It would reduce the effectiveness of our best weapon, our cavalry. We'll wait till Morgorath comes to us. Then we can fight him on ground that's more to our liking." There was an urgent clatter of hooves from the rear, and the royal party turned to watch a courier spurring his horse up the last slope to the knoll where they waited. He hauled on his reins, looked around until he saw the king's blonde head, then dug in his spurs again, eventually bringing his horse to a sliding stop beside them. His green surcoat, light mail armour, and thin-bladed sword showed him to be a scout. "Your Majesty," he said breathlessly, "a report from Sir Vincent." Vincent was the leader of the Messenger Corps, a group of soldiers who acted as the king's eyes and ears during a battle, carrying reports and orders to all parts of the battlefield. Duncan nodded acknowledgement, indicating that the man should go ahead and give his message. The rider swallowed several times and looked anxiously at the king and his three barons. All at once, Arald knew this was not going to be good news. "Sir," the scout said hesitantly, "Sir Vincent's respects, sir, and there appear to be Scandians behind us." There were startled exclamations from several of the junior officers surrounding the command group. Fergus swung on them, his brows drawn together in a frown. "Be quiet!" he stormed, and, in an instant, the noise dropped away. The aides looked shamed-faced at their lack of discipline. "Exactly where are these Scandians, and how many are there?" Duncan asked the scout calmly. His unruffled manner seemed to communicate itself to the messenger. This time, he answered with a lot more confidence. "The first group are visible on the low ridge to the northwest, Your Majesty. As yet, we can see only 100 or so. Sir Vincent suggests that the best position for you to view the situation would be from the small hill to our left rear." The king nodded and turned to one of the younger officers. "Ranald, perhaps you might ride and advise Sir David of this new development. Tell him we are shifting the command post to the hill Sir Vincent suggested." "Yes, my lord," replied the young knight. He wheeled his horse and set off at a gallop. The king then turned to his companions. "Gentlemen, let's see about these Scandians, shall we?" Shading his eyes, Baron Arald peered at the small group of men on the hill behind them. Even at this distance, it was possible to make out the horned helmets and the huge circular shields that the sea raiders carried. A small group had even advanced down the near side of the hill, and they were easier to make out. Just as obvious was their choice of the typical Scandian arrowhead formation as they advanced. He estimated that several hundred of the enemy were now in sight, with who knew how many more hidden on the other side of the hills. He felt a great weight of sadness upon his shoulders. The fact that the Scandians were here meant only one thing. Halt had failed. And knowing Halt as he did, he knew that probably meant that the grizzled ranger had died in the attempt. He knew Halt would never have surrendered, not when the need to stop the Scandians breaking through to the army's rear was so vital. Duncan voiced the thoughts of all of them. "They're Scandians, all right." He glanced around the hilltop. "We're going to have to fight a defensive battle, my lords," he continued. "I suggest we begin to pull our men into a circle around this hill. It's as good a spot as any to be fighting on both sides." They all knew it was only a matter of time now before Morgorath advanced to crush them between the two jaws of the trap he had set. "Rider coming!" called one of the aides, pointing. They all turned to face the way he indicated. From a copse of trees on the right-hand end of the bridge, a lone rider burst into sight. Several of the Scandians gave chase, hurling spears and clubs after him, but he was stretched low over his horse's neck, his grey-green cloak streaming behind him in the wind, and soon he outdistanced the pursuit. "That's Gillen!" Baron Arald muttered, recognizing the bay horse he rode. He looked in vain for a second ranger behind Gillen, hoping against hope that Halt might have somehow survived. But it was not to be. His shoulders sagged a little as he realized that Gillen appeared to be the only survivor of the force that had marched off so boldly into the thorn tree forest. Gillen had hit the flat land now and was still riding full pelt towards them. He saw the royal standards flying on the knoll and swerved Blaze towards them. In a few minutes, he drew rein beside them, covered in dust, one sleeve of his tunic ripped, and a rough, blood-stained bandage around his head. "Sir," he said breathlessly, forgetting the niceties of addressing royalty. "Halt says, can you—" He got no further, as at least 4 people interrupted him. Baron Fergus's voice, however, was the loudest. "Halt? He's alive?" Gillen grinned in reply. "Oh, yes, sir. Alive and kicking." "But the Scandians," King Duncan began, indicating the lines of men on the far ridge. Gillen's grin widened even further. "Beaten, sir. We caught them totally by surprise and cut them to pieces. Those men there are our archers, wearing helmets and shields taken from the enemy. It was Halt's idea." "To what purpose?" Arald asked crisply, and Gillen turned to face him, with an apologetic nod of his head to the king. "To deceive Morgorath, my lord," he replied. "He's expecting to see Scandians attack you from the rear, and now he will. That's why they even made a pretense of trying to stop me just now. Our own cavalry is just beyond the brow of the ridge. Halt proposes that he should advance with the archers, forcing you to turn and face the rear. Then, with any luck, as Morgorath attacks with his wargles, both the archers and your main army should open a path through the centre, allowing the hidden cavalry to come through and hit Morgorath when he's in the open." "By God, that's a great idea," said Duncan enthusiastically. "Odds are that we'll stir up so much dust and confusion that he won't see Halt's cavalry until it's right on top of him. Then, my lord, we can deploy the heavy cavalry from either wing to hit the wargles in the flanks." The new speaker was Sir David. He had arrived unnoticed as Gillen was explaining Halt's plan. King Duncan hesitated for a second or two, tugging at his short beard. Then he nodded decisively. "We'll do it," he said. "Gentlemen, you'd better get to your commands straight away. Fergus, Arald, take a section of the heavy cavalry each to the left and right wings and stand ready. Tyler, command the infantry in the centre. Make sure they know this is a fake attack. And order them to shout and beat their swords on their shields as the Scandians approach. We'll make it sound like a battle as well as look like one. Have them ready to split to the sides at 3 horn blasts." "3 horn blasts, aye, my lord," said Tyler. He dug his spurs into his battle horse's side and galloped away to take command of the infantry. Duncan looked to his remaining commanders. "Get to it, my lords. We don't have much time." From behind, one of his aides called out, "Sir, the Scandians are moving downhill." A second or so later, another man echoed the cry, "And the Wargals are beginning to move forward." Duncan smiled grimly at his commanders. "I think it's time we gave Morgorath a little surprise," he said.